Hi everyone, this is Jane Friedman again. Thank you very much for joining today's session on how writers can succeed in the future of digital publishing. It is really a pleasure to be talking on this topic, which is probably the topic I've been most obsessed with in the past few years, especially as all of this new technology, all of these new developments are happening all around us. In the wide culture, in the world, and also definitely just in our own individual writing and publishing lives, you can see the changes happening. I've been working in publishing since 1998, and everything feels so dramatically different than when I first started in this business. There's really, within the past few years, been a complete upheaval, which has been furthered and amplified by the economic downturn to some extent. But a lot of the changes that I'm talking about today, they're here to stay. They're not related to the downturn in the economy, but really to changing how we all consume media, how we develop that media before it's consumed, and then what happens to it after its first use, and how it gets distributed and how it gets rediscovered again and again. For anyone who's watching what's going on with publications today, you've probably seen the newspapers disappearing, magazines folding, book publishers scrambling, and even experimental efforts that we see out there in book publishing especially, like Harper's Studio or Quartet, haven't so far been able to make a go with some of the new business models that we all discuss, but haven't necessarily seen take off. There's so much talent in the industry, and we still have a lot of questions that have yet to be answered about what the future of publishing and media is going to be. You've probably heard a lot of talk about content wanting to be free, and you can see this exemplified in the music industry when a lot of music was being downloaded for free. It's still being downloaded for free. But of course now there is a payment model. But in the meantime, the music industry has suffered tremendously. And some of you may have heard about the book Chris Anderson released recently within the past year or two called Free. And if content does want to be free, where does that leave us? Where does that leave publishers? Where does that leave authors? And also, thinking about readers, if there are fewer people reading, if there are fewer people buying books and magazines, how does that affect what we do? And how do authors earn money if publications can no longer pay because readers are no longer paying? So this is kind of the landscape that we have before us and how this session came to exist, thinking about these questions. There are many unanswered questions. They're going to remain unanswered for a while. But the industry for sure is being disrupted. And it affects you. It affects your relationships with other editors, agents, publications, and it affects your long-term career goals. And you don't want to panic or get desperate, but you do want to be thinking long-term how to fashion your career so that you can be successful no matter what is happening in the industry. So, next slide. I think the good news here is that you as a writer have more control and power than ever. And the way that technology has shifted our universe, it means that you have the same tools, really, as the publishers have. And publishers aren't sure what the future holds any more than you know. And so writers hold the advantage in many cases because when it comes to knowing readers, when it comes to reaching the people who really love your stuff, you have that first connection that many publishers don't have. So that's something to keep in mind throughout all of this. I think the number one secret at this stage of the game for anyone, it's really the battle for attention. And how can you uncover, identify, and reach the people who are interested in your work, your information, your entertainment, and in your message? Once you figure that out, you can assemble a strategy for being consistently visible to that audience and building credibility with that audience and engaging with that audience. You've probably heard the word platform. It's almost, in some circles, become a cliche to talk about the platform. And for those who aren't as familiar with the concept, let me briefly explain. It's really, as you can tell by the picture, it's something that kind of makes you visible and kind of puts you in a spot where you can be seen by the people who are interested in what you have to offer. A platform isn't a one-time event. It's not something you're going to go off and do tonight. It's not one thing that you do. And it's also important to remember it's not about your credentials or your expertise or your experience. It's not about those things alone. It's what you do with all of those things and how that makes you consistently visible to an audience and how you grow that audience over the long term. That's really critical to remember. It's the minute you decide you want to be an author is when you have to start thinking about how you're reaching your readerships and what the message is, what's the core of the message that you want to share with people. So in thinking about this, I usually envision 3 models, and I'm going to make some broad, sweeping generalizations here, but I think these categories can be really helpful when you're envisioning what's going to empower your career, what's the engine that's driving it, what's giving you resource, and what are you comfortable with? What are your strengths? I'll be making a lot of suggestions, in the next hour about things to do, experiment with, and try. But you always have to remember that your strengths are really key and what you enjoy is really key. We are in this to have fun. It shouldn't feel like something that's not a part of who you are. Certainly, in all of the models we're going to discuss, your strengths play a role, but also what your audience is looking for also plays a role, and we'll talk more about that later on. So a quick pop quiz before I go into the first model. I like to ask people, what do Hollywood and Broadway have in common with publishing? And I think the one thing that they all have in common that people often forget is that they're commerce driven. They're all looking for money. And this is one model that I think a lot of people aspire to but might not necessarily know how to reach, or they might not really understand what's required. You'll notice on the previous slide I had a picture of James Patterson, and he's kind of what I would consider the epitome of the commercial model, someone who puts his name on books as a brand, and it's not that he writes all those books, he doesn't. He farms out a lot of his books and he makes no secret about it. He's a consummate professional when it comes to the publishing world. He's professional, he's adaptable, he's business oriented, he's marketing minded, he's market driven. And when you're thinking about how do I make myself appealing to New York publishers, and I'm talking about the big 6, it takes the qualities of a business person, the qualities of someone who can really be flexible in the face of market demands to succeed.